The state of Vermont in October looks like a painting someone started and never finished. Miles of birch trees, stone fences disappearing into fog, fields that gave up on summer weeks ago and haven't decided what to become yet. And somewhere at the end of a road that turns from pavement to gravel to something barely worth the name a house, white, or what was once white. Pull closer. The porch roof sags, the paint has gone in places down to bare gray wood beneath. The garden is dead stems and hard earth, 3 fence posts standing, several that gave up. From the outside, it looks like a place where things ended. But the front door is opening. A boy, 16, a golden dog at his side. He steps into the doorway and stops. Because the inside of that house, the floors, the furniture, the air itself looks like someone left this morning and is expected back by evening. Someone cleaned these floors last week, and the week before, and every week for a year and a half, for a boy who wasn't here yet. On the dining table, one envelope. His name, written by a hand he has never seen before. He doesn't know yet what's inside. He doesn't know yet what's buried under the apple tree in the yard. He doesn't know yet why his uncle's car is already turning onto Birch Road. He just stands there, in a house that was waiting for him. And he starts to understand that some doors, when they open, don't close the same way twice. Part 1. The House That Waited. The first thing Callum noticed about Millhaven was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet. Not the kind of quiet you chose on a Sunday morning when the coffee was hot and nothing needed doing. The other kind. The kind that had been there so long it stopped feeling like absence and started feeling like something solid. Like walls. Like weather pressing down from a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or just threaten. He pressed his forehead against the cold bus window and watched Vermont slide past in the gray October light. Birch trees, stone fences, fields that had given up pretending to be farms. The occasional white steeple rising above a tree line, like someone had forgotten to finish building a town and just left the church there as a placeholder. Copper shifted beside him. The dog was too big for a bus seat. Everyone on the bus had made that clear, with their eyes, their size, the deliberate way they chose seats 2 rows away. Copper didn't care. Copper never cared what people thought. That was one of the things Callum loved most about him and would never say out loud to anyone. The dog rearranged himself for the 11th time. Massive golden head, ears too long, always drooping slightly to the left. Eyes the color of dark honey currently fixed on Callum with the expression that meant, I know something is wrong. I am not going to ask about it. I am just going to be here. Callum looked away first. His phone had 12 unread messages. His mother, his stepfather, his mother again. Then a long gap. Then his mother again, probably after his stepfather told her to try one more time. He didn't open any of them. The bus slowed. Millhaven, Vermont. Population 2,400. 1 traffic light. 1 diner. 1 hardware store that had been owned by the same family since 1962 and showed no signs of changing hands or updating its sign. Callum had looked it up. He'd looked up everything about this town because when you're 16 and being shipped somewhere, you've never been to live with someone you barely know, you learn whatever you can find. You build a map in your head. You fill in the edges. It doesn't help, but you do it anyway. Nora Ward was standing by a gray pickup truck in the parking lot. Callum recognized her from one photograph. His father had kept it in a desk drawer, not displayed, not hidden, just kept. A woman with white hair cut short and a face that had decided decades ago it was done, apologizing for being serious. She was wearing a green wool coat and sensible boots, and she was watching the bus the way people watch weather. Waiting. Measuring. Callum climbed down with his backpack and his duffel and Copper's leash. Copper stepped off the bus and immediately sat down on the parking lot asphalt and looked around with the calm authority of a dog who had decided this place was acceptable and would now be evaluated further. Nora looked at Copper. Copper looked at Nora. Something passed between them. Callum didn't know what. He would think about it later. "You're taller than I expected," Nora said. "Hi," Callum said. That was it. That was the whole reunion. She took his duffel bag without asking, put it in the truck bed, opened the passenger door. Callum got in. Copper took up the entire back seat and pressed his nose against the window and fogged it immediately. Nora drove without music. Callum counted fence posts. Her house was small and warm and smelled like pine cleaner and something baking he couldn't quite identify. She showed him the room he'd be staying in. Single bed, blue quilt, a window that looked out at the backyard and the tree line beyond. A hook on the back of the door put there thoughtfully at exactly the right height. Bathrooms across the hall, she said. Dinner at 6, I don't wait. She left. Callum sat on the edge of the blue quilt. Copper put his head in Callum's lap and breathed. Outside, the light was going gray and gold, the way Vermont light did in October, like everything was slowly being preserved in amber, like the whole world was preparing to hold still. Callum didn't cry. He'd stopped crying 4 months ago, and he wasn't sure if that was progress or something else entirely. He just sat there, and Copper breathed, and the room held them both without asking for anything in return. Breakfast the next morning was eggs and toast and orange juice placed on the table without ceremony. Nora sat across from him with coffee and the newspaper, and she read it the way people used to read newspapers, completely with focus, folding each section back with precision. Callum ate. Copper sat under the table and waited with dignity for anything to fall. There's something I need to give you this morning, Nora said, without looking up. Okay. Finish eating first. He finished eating. She went to the sideboard in the hallway and came back with a brown envelope. The edges were soft with age or handling, hard to tell which. She set it on the table where his plate had been. This came through a lawyer's office when you turned 16 last month, she said. It was held until then deliberately. There's a reason for that, which you'll understand when you read it. Callum looked at the envelope. His name was on the front, Callum Ward, in handwriting he didn't recognize. It's from your grandfather, Nora said. From Silas. He'd heard that name twice in his life. Once from his father, who said it the way you said the name of a storm that had already passed. Once from his mother, right before she stopped talking about that side of the family entirely. He knew the shape of the story, the falling out, the silence that became permanent, the man who never called, the man who was apparently not entirely gone. Inside the envelope, legal documents, a property deed, a single page of conditions typed and notarized, and underneath all of that, one handwritten letter. The property was a house, number 14 Birch Road, Millhaven, Vermont, left to Callum Ward specifically. Not to Nora, not to Preston, to Callum, with one condition stated clearly at the top of the document in language a lawyer had written, but that felt underneath the formal words like something older, something personal. The beneficiary must occupy the property continuously for 30 days following receipt of this notice. Occupancy must begin within 60 days of the beneficiary's 16th birthday. If these conditions are not met, the property reverts to the Millhaven Community Foundation. Callum did the math. He had 47 days left. He built that house in 1971, Nora said quietly. She was looking at her coffee. He and your grandmother. She died before your father was born. Silas lived there alone for the last 22 years of his life. Callum looked at the handwritten letter. He wasn't ready for it yet. He folded it back inside the envelope. Will you take me there? She looked up then, and something in her face shifted. Not softened exactly. More like a door that had been locked for a long time, just moved slightly on its hinges. Yes, she said. I'll take you. The truck turned onto Birch Road, and the road went from paved to gravel to a track that was really more of an intention than an actual road. Trees on both sides bare and white, the sky between them pale as paper. And then the house. Callum saw it through the windshield, and his first thought was, this is a mistake. The porch roof sagged at the left corner like something had been leaning on it for too long, and finally won. The paint, once white, had gone to gray, and then to something almost transparent in places, revealing old wood beneath. Two of the front windows were original glass warped slightly, the kind that made the world outside look like a watercolor left in the rain. The garden was nothing but hard earth and dead stems. The fence along the front had 3 posts standing and several that had given up entirely. It looked like neglect, like absence, like a place where things stopped. Nora pulled up and stopped the engine. I'll wait here, she said. Callum looked at her. This part is yours, she said simply. He got out. Copper jumped down after him and immediately put his nose to the ground and started moving in a slow, deliberate arc around the front of the house. Not urgent, methodical, the way Copper always moved when he was taking something seriously. The front door key was in the envelope. Old brass worn smooth. The lock turned. Callum pushed the door open and stopped, because nothing about the inside matched the outside. The floors were hardwood and they were clean. Not recently mopped clean, naturally clean, preserved. The kind of floors that had been cared for so consistently and for so long that the care had become part of them. They caught the thin October light and held it warmly like they'd been doing that job for decades and intended to keep doing it. The furniture was covered in white cloth, neatly draped, carefully tucked. No dust on the cloth, no dust anywhere. A bookshelf along one wall full. A stone fireplace swept clean. Curtains at the windows pulled halfway, letting in enough light to see by. It smelled like wood and something dry and faintly sweet. Old paper, cedar. The smell of a house that had been closed but not abandoned. Copper walked past Callum. The dog moved through the room slowly. Nose down, then up, then down again. He went to the bookshelf and sniffed along the bottom row. He went to the fireplace and sat in front of it for a moment. He walked down the short hallway toward the kitchen and came back. Then he walked to the middle of the living room and lay down. Front paws stretched out, head resting on them, eyes half closed, like he'd been here before, like this was where he belonged. Callum watched him for a long moment. "Really," he said. Copper thumped his tail once, didn't move. On the dining table there was a single white envelope. Callum's name was written on it in the same handwriting from the deed documents. Careful letters, the kind of handwriting that took effort. The hand that made them had been old and probably unsteady, but the effort was visible in every stroke. He stood at the table for a moment without touching it. Then he opened it. The letter was short. 4 paragraphs, less than a page. "Callum, you don't know me. I know that's my fault and not yours. I want to say it plainly before anything else because I spent too many years not saying plain things, and I don't have time left for that habit. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for anything. What I'm leaving you is yours because it should have been your father's, and since it can't be his, it belongs to you. Don't sell this house yet. There are things here that belong to you, things I should have given your father a long time ago and didn't, and I regret that more than I can write down. The house will show you if you let it. Start with what you love most. Keep the dog close. Silas Ward." 3 drawings at the bottom of the page, small and careful, done in pencil. A book, a tree, a mirror. Callum read the letter twice, then a third time. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket against his chest. Start with what you love most. He looked at Copper still stretched out on the living room floor. He looked around at the shelves, the covered furniture, the fireplace, the thin October light on the clean floors. He thought about his father, about the way his father used to look when he talked about Vermont, which was almost never. There was a specific expression, like pressing on a bruise, like choosing to feel something because not feeling it would be worse. Outside, a crow called twice and went quiet. Callum put his hands in his pockets. "Okay," he said to no one. "To the house. To the man who had cleaned these floors and covered this furniture and written a careful letter and then run out of time. Okay, I'll stay." He went back to Nora's that night, gathered more of his things, told her he'd be sleeping at the house on Birch Road from here on. She nodded, made no argument, put 2 extra blankets in a bag without being asked. "The heat works," she said. "Furnace is old, but it works. I had it checked last month." Callum looked at her. "You had it checked?" "Someone had to." He didn't know what to do with that, so he said thank you, picked up the bag and went. He slept on the covered sofa that night because he hadn't moved anything yet. Copper took up more than his half of the space and radiated heat like a small golden furnace, and Callum didn't push him away. The house settled around them in the dark, old wood talking to itself, pipes cooling, wind moving against the windows without getting in. It felt strangely like being held. The knock at the door came the next morning while Callum was eating cereal he'd brought from Nora's and reading the letter again for the 4th time. 3 even knocks, confident, the knock of someone who expected to be answered. He opened the door. A woman in her early 70s stood on the porch, tall with white hair pulled back in a loose knot and the weathered quality of a face that had spent decades outdoors. She was wearing a heavy knit cardigan and rubber gardening boots, and she was carrying a pot covered with a dish towel, clearly still hot, because she was holding it with both hands in a folded cloth. "Dorothea Finch," she said. I live at the end of the road, other direction from town. Butternut squash soup. Are you going to let me in? Callum stepped back. Dot walked in like she'd been here before, because as Callum would soon understand she had, many times. She set the soup on the kitchen counter and uncovered it, and the smell filled the room immediately, and Copper materialized from wherever he'd been within approximately 4 seconds. Dot looked at Copper, and her face did the thing that Nora's face had done in the parking lot. That shift, that almost recognition. Golden Retriever, she said. Not a question. His name's Copper. Of course it is. She said it quietly, almost to herself. Then she looked up at Callum, and she looked at him the way people looked at photographs, searching for the person they already knew underneath. You have your father's eyes, she said. Callum felt the sentence land somewhere in his chest and stay there. And your dog looks like Goldie. He didn't know that name. Goldie, Dot said, carefully watching his face. Ask your grandmother. When you're ready. She didn't explain more. She pulled 2 bowls from the cabinet like she knew where everything was, which she did filled them, sat down at the kitchen table and looked at him expectantly. Sit down, she said. Soup won't help you standing up. He sat down. Your grandfather was my neighbor for 31 years, she said. Matter of fact, no preamble. Not a warm man, not a cold one either exactly. More like a November man. You know what I mean. When November comes, it's not cruel, it's just honest. Callum wrapped his hands around the bowl. He talked about your father, she said. More in the last few years than ever before. And he talked about you. Callum looked up. Not much, Dot said. But enough. He knew your name. He knew you'd had a hard year. She paused, looked down at her soup. He knew about the dog. The kitchen was quiet except for Copper, who had positioned himself directly between the two of them in case soup fell from either direction. How? Callum asked. Dot looked at him steadily. A man who won't pick up the phone can still pay attention. Silas paid attention. He just paid it from the wrong distance and too late. She finished her soup, set the bowl down. I need to tell you something, she said. And I want you to understand I'm not telling you because I'm interfering. I'm telling you because Silas asked me to, and because I don't break promises to dead people any more than I break them to living ones. Callum waited. I have a key to this house, Dot said. I've had it for 18 months, since the day Silas died. She folded her hands on the table. I've been coming every week, checking the furnace, cleaning the floors, making sure the roof wasn't leaking, making sure no pipes froze, making sure everything was here and ready. Callum was very still. He asked me to, she said. He said when the boy comes, don't explain anything up front. Let him find his own way in first. Let the house do what it's supposed to do. The house, cleaned every week for 18 months, floors polished, white cloths on the furniture straight and tucked, no dust, no decay. Everything held exactly in place waiting. You've been here the whole time, Callum said slowly. All of this. He stopped. All of it, Doc confirmed. The clean floors, the working heat, the white cloths, someone had to. She looked at him the same way Nora had said those exact 3 words. Like it was obvious. Like of course someone had to, and of course she was the someone. He left you something worth coming to, she said. I just made sure it was still here when you arrived. Callum didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. And Dot, who understood the grammar of silence that Vermont people had developed over generations of cold winters and limited words, said nothing either. They sat with it. Copper put his head in Dot's lap without asking. She scratched his ears without looking down like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she'd done it before. He asked Nora about Goldie that evening. He drove back to her house after Dot left, and he found her in the kitchen doing dishes, and he stood in the doorway and said, Who was Goldie? Nora's hands went still in the water. She didn't turn around immediately. She finished the dish she was washing, dried her hands, turned. Where did you hear that name, Dot? Nora looked at the window. Outside it was full dark now, just the reflection of the kitchen back at them, the two of them and the yellow light and Copper waiting patiently in the hallway. Goldie was a dog, she said. Golden Retriever. She lived at the Birch Road house from 1988 to 1999. She said it carefully, the way you said things you'd kept packed away for a long time and needed to unwrap without breaking. Your father was 8 when they got her. He loved that dog. A pause. He used to draw her all the time, in notebooks on the edges of schoolwork anywhere. He had a real talent for it. Callum felt something tighten in his throat. He'd never known his father drew. When your father and Silas had their falling out, she stopped, started again. When your father left, he didn't take much. He couldn't. He was 23 and he left with a car and a box and his pride. She said the last word without bitterness, just as fact. He left Goldie behind. I don't think he had a choice, but I think he never stopped thinking about her. Callum looked at Copper. Copper, who was a golden retriever, who had been part of their family since Callum was 3 years old. A warm, red-gold presence who slept on his bed and followed his father around the house on weekend mornings and sat in the front seat on long drives, who had ended up in Callum's arms at the end. He never told me, Callum said. No, Nora said. He wouldn't have. The kitchen was very quiet. He named you after Silas's father, Nora said then, quietly, like she'd been deciding whether to say it. Callum, your great-grandfather's name. It was a family name on the Ward side going back generations. Your father chose it. She looked at him. I don't know if he knew you'd figure that out someday. I don't know if he meant for you to. Callum Ward, named for a great-grandfather he'd never known by a father who'd cut ties with that whole family and still somehow couldn't quite let go. He stood there in his grandmother's kitchen doorway and felt the pull of something immense and quiet. Not grief exactly, not yet. Something more like the sensation of a very large picture coming into focus slowly and realizing the whole time you'd been looking at only one corner of it. Day 4. Callum was in the living room of the Birch Road house trying to figure out where to start. He'd opened some of the white cloths, moved a few chairs. The bookshelf ran the entire length of one wall, and it was dense history, architecture field guides, fiction from the 70s, technical manuals, Vermont local histories going back to 1940. He stood in front of it for a long time. Start with what you love most. He loved drawing. He hadn't touched a pencil in 4 months. He didn't know if that part of him still worked. He loved books. He'd loved them before everything got heavy, before reading started to feel like trying to hold water in cupped hands. He scanned the spines. Copper got up from his corner and walked to the shelf. He sniffed along the bottom row with slow attention, the way he sniffed the perimeter of any new place. He stopped at one point, sniffed again, pushed his nose firmly against the spine of one particular book, then stepped back and looked at Callum with his ears forward. The book tilted. Callum caught it before it fell. Birds of Vermont, Field Guide and Illustrated Record, hardcover worn 1983. The cover showed a painted thrush on a birch branch, colors faded but still clear. He opened it. Inside the front cover in handwriting, he now recognized, your father loved this book. He used to draw the birds in the margins. Callum turned pages, and there they were. Small pencil drawings in the margins done in the slightly too large lines of a child's hand, but with something in them. Something that reached. Every bird in the text had a corresponding sketch somewhere nearby, not copies of the illustrations, but original drawings from observation. A chickadee catching at an angle, a crow from behind. A blue heron extraordinarily detailed the lines pressed harder where the artist had gotten excited. His father had been maybe 10, maybe 11, sitting somewhere probably in this house with this book with a pencil drawing birds, and never mentioning it once in 16 years. Callum sat down on the floor right where he was. Copper came and sat next to him, pressed against his side, warm and solid and real. Callum turned every page. He looked at every drawing. He wasn't crying. He was just looking, memorizing, taking in this version of his father that had existed before all the versions he knew, before the responsibilities, before the marriage, before the grief that both of them had carried in different shapes, before Callum. His father at 10 drawing birds in the margins of a field guide, not lost, not unreachable, just earlier than everything Callum had known. Tucked between pages 64 and 65, a small brass key, darker than the front door key, different teeth pattern. It fell onto the floor when Callum turned the page and made a small clear sound against the hardwood. He picked it up, looked at it, 3 symbols at the bottom of Silas's letter. A book, a tree, a mirror. He'd found the book. The car arrived that same afternoon. Black out of place on the Birch Road gravel. Connecticut plates. A man got out wearing a gray blazer and slacks that had no business being on this road, and polished shoes already collecting dust. Preston Ward. Callum had never met him. He knew the name the way you knew the names of storms that had happened before you were old enough to understand weather as a category, a shape, a direction things had come from. Preston was 46, dark hair gone silver at the temples, good-looking in the way that came from paying careful attention to being good-looking. He smiled when he saw Callum, and the smile arrived before the warmth did, which was the wrong order. "Callum," he said, like he knew him, like this was a reunion. "I'm your Uncle Preston. I know we've never actually met, and that's something I'd like to change." Callum stood on the porch steps. Copper stood between Callum and the man below. Not aggressive, not growling, just standing. A golden wall between them planted and still. Preston looked at the dog. The smile held, but something behind it made a small adjustment. "Beautiful animal," he said. "What do you need?" Callum said. Preston's eyebrows went up slightly, then settled. "I wanted to check in. I heard you were here and I thought family should know family, especially now. This house is a lot to take on, Callum. You're 16, you're dealing with a lot already." He glanced up at the house behind Callum with the practiced eye of someone calculating. "I have contacts in real estate, people who specialize in rural Vermont properties. They'd give you a fair price, probably better than fair. You'd have money for school, money for whatever you need. You wouldn't have to deal with all of this." Callum looked at him. Preston met the look and held it. "The 30 days aren't finished," Callum said. "The conditions haven't been met yet." Of course. No pressure. I just wanted you to know the option exists." "I know the option exists." Callum's voice was level. "I've read the documents." Another small adjustment behind Preston's eyes. "Think about it," Preston said. He reached into his pocket and produced a card, set it on the porch rail rather than handing it across Copper. "No rush, I'm easy to reach." He went back to his car, drove away. The dust settled slowly in the road behind him. Callum stood there until the car was gone. Copper turned and looked up at him. "Yeah," Callum said. He picked up the card, looked at it, set it on the inside windowsill where he could keep seeing it. You didn't put things out of sight. His father had taught him that on a drive home from somewhere years ago. You don't solve the things you can't see. You put them where you can watch them. He went back inside. Copper followed. The brass key from the book sat on the dining table next to the letter, and the property deed in the 3 small pencil drawings, a book, a tree, a mirror, one down. The house was quiet around them, holding its breath, holding its stories, holding all the things a man who didn't know how to speak had spent 20 years trying to find another way to say. Callum made himself dinner from what he'd brought, ate it standing at the kitchen counter, listened to the house settle in the early dark. Outside, the birch trees went silver in the last light and then disappeared into the night. He slept better than he had in months. He didn't know why. He didn't question it. Copper curled against his back and breathed in the deep, even rhythm of a dog who had decided this is home. This is where we are. This is fine. Callum lay awake just long enough to look at the ceiling in the dark. He thought about his father at 10 years old pressing a pencil harder on the page when a drawing was going right, feeling that small rush, that private joy. He thought about the brass key on the table downstairs. He thought about the tree, and somewhere between one thought and the next, he was asleep. Part 2, what the walls kept. The apple tree was the oldest thing on the property. Callum had walked past it a dozen times without really seeing it. It stood at the far end of the backyard, away from the house, away from the broken fence line, away from everything. Alone the way old things sometimes chose to be alone. The trunk was thick and dark and deeply grooved bark, split in long vertical lines, like the tree had been trying to say something for years and finally given up on words. The branches were bare now, October stripped. They reached in every direction without apology. It didn't look like a place where someone hid things. It looked like a place where things waited. Copper found it on day 6. Callum was on the porch with the letter and the brass key and the 3 pencil drawings trying to figure out his next move. Cold morning, sky the color of old pewter, breath coming out in small white clouds. He had coffee from a small French press he'd brought from Nora's, and he was drinking it too fast because of the cold. Copper was in the yard. The dog had been making slow circuits of the property every morning since they arrived. Not anxious, methodical, like he was doing rounds, like he had an actual job and took it seriously, which Callum had decided he did. But this morning, Copper stopped. At the apple tree, he sniffed the base once, twice, walked around the whole circumference of the trunk with his nose an inch from the ground, stopped on the far side, sniffed again. Then he started digging. Not frantically, not the way dogs dug at the beach or after a squirrel, steadily, deliberately, like something his body already knew how to do and had been saving for the right moment. Callum set down his coffee and walked over. Copper dug. Dirt flew back between his legs in even rhythmic bursts. The ground was hard with October cold, and Copper worked at it with patient force, breathing evenly. A dog who had decided something was here and was going to prove it. Callum crouched down and started digging with his hands. The soil was cold enough to hurt immediately. He kept going. Copper moved to the side to give him room. Man and dog on their knees in a Vermont backyard on a gray October morning, pulling cold dirt away from the base of an old apple tree. It took longer than it should have, or exactly as long as it needed to. Hard to say. Copper's paw hit metal first, a sound like knocking on a door. Callum pushed the remaining dirt away with both hands. A tin box emerged. Not large, rectangular. The kind you'd keep index cards in or photographs or letters. Dark with age and earth, but intact. A small padlock on the front, old style, the hole slightly rusted. Callum reached into his jacket pocket. The brass key. He brushed the dirt from the lock, slid the key in. It turned smoothly, like it had been waiting to. He lifted the lid. No money, no jewelry, no dramatic revelation wrapped in velvet. A bundle of letters tied with a strip of brown leather. The paper was aged but protected. Someone had wrapped them in wax cloth before sealing the tin. There were 23 of them. He could see that immediately by the thickness of the bundle. Each envelope was sealed. Each was addressed in the same careful handwriting he knew now. To Daniel, his father's name. 23 letters addressed to his father and never sent. And beneath the bundle, folded separately, a single sheet of paper. A hand-drawn floor plan of the house. Every room labeled in small, neat printing. Callum recognized the layout. He'd been living in it for 6 days, except for one room. On the second floor at the end of the hallway, there was a small rectangle drawn in pencil. Circled once in red pen, no label, no explanation, just the circle. A room that didn't exist on any floor plan he'd walked. A room that wasn't there, or wasn't visible yet. Copper sat back on his haunches and looked at Callum with an expression that said, "There you go. That's what I found you. You're welcome." Callum didn't open the letters immediately. He brought the tin inside and put it on the dining table next to everything else. The letter from Silas, the property deed, the brass key, the Birds of Vermont field guide with his father's drawings in the margins. The table was becoming something. A record, a map laid out in objects rather than words. He made more coffee. He sat down. He looked at the bundle of 23 letters and thought about opening them, and then thought about not opening them, and went back and forth on this for longer than he would have liked to admit. Because once he read them, he'd know. And once he knew, he couldn't unknow. And part of him, the 16-year-old part, the part that had spent 4 months trying not to feel things too completely, because complete feelings were how you ended up on the floor unable to get up. That part wasn't sure he was ready. Except the letter said the house will show you. Except there was a room on that floor plan that shouldn't exist. Except Copper was sitting across the room looking at him with the steady amber gaze that meant, "I know you're stalling. I know why. I'm not judging. But we both know what you're going to do." Callum untied the leather strip. He opened the first letter. Silas Ward was not a poetic man. The letters were not poetic. They were plain and sometimes halting, and in several places the syntax went sideways in the way it did when someone was thinking faster than they were writing, or when they had restarted and the false start was still visible in the structure of the sentence. There were no grand declarations, no flowery apologies, no speeches. Just a father writing to a son he'd lost contact with, starting from the beginning. Starting from "You left, and I didn't stop you, and I've been trying to understand why I didn't stop you ever since." The first letter was dated 23 years ago, when Callum's father, Daniel Ward, would have been 23 years old, the same age he'd been when he left Millhaven. Silas wrote, "I don't know where you are right now. I have an address from before, but I don't know if it's still right. I'm writing this anyway. Maybe I'll send it. Probably I won't. But I need to write it like I need to say your name out loud every now and then, just to remember what it sounds like. Daniel, your mother named you. I was afraid of the name at first because it was too gentle for a ward. I was wrong about that. Callum had to put the letter down. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth, breathed, kept going. The letters spanned 20 years. Not regular, not every year. They came in clusters, sometimes 3 in a month, then nothing for 2 years, then a single one written late at night in handwriting that was more uneven than usual. The paper in the later ones was slightly different, thicker, the handwriting slower and larger as Silas aged. He'd written one when Callum's parents got married. He'd written one when Callum was born. That one was short, 4 sentences. I heard you had a son. I heard you named him Callum after my father. I don't know if that was for me or for him or just for yourself, and it doesn't matter. Whatever the reason, thank you. Callum read it 3 times. His father had named him after Silas's father, knowing Silas would hear about it, knowing it would reach him somehow. Not calling, not writing, not bridging any of the distance between them. Just choosing a name. Leaving a message the way people left messages when they didn't know how to say things directly. A quiet signal sent across a silence that had lasted years. And Silas had heard it, and written a letter he never sent. 2 men who didn't know how to reach each other, both of them reaching neither of them, knowing the other's hands were extended too. Callum sat at the kitchen table of that house on Birch Road in Millhaven, Vermont, and read every single letter. He didn't rush. He didn't skip. The October light moved across the floor as the hours passed, and Copper moved with it, following the warmth the way dogs did, resettling himself in each new patch of sunlight as it crossed the room slowly from window to window. When Callum finished the last letter dated 2.5 years ago, 3 months before Silas died, the handwriting slow but deliberate, he sat still for a long time. He thought about his father and his grandfather, 2 men with the same stubbornness, the same inability to say first what they needed to say, the same love that couldn't find its way out into the open. Both of them reaching, neither of them knowing. He thought about how much time that cost. Then he went upstairs with the floor plan, because there was still a room that didn't exist, and he was going to find it. The second floor had 4 doors. Callum had opened them all in the first days. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, 1 linen closet. The hallway itself was narrow and ended at a window that looked out over the backyard and the apple tree. He stood in the hallway now with a floor plan and measured distances, the way his father had taught him to do when they were building things together, estimating with handspans and paces. And the numbers didn't work. The hallway was 3 feet shorter than it should have been. 3 feet that had to be somewhere. Callum went to the far wall, the one at the end of the corridor beside the window. He pressed on it. It felt solid. He pressed harder. He ran his hands along the baseboard. There was a section where the grain of the wood ran slightly differently from the rest. You wouldn't see it unless you were looking for something specific. You wouldn't notice it in normal light in a normal walk through a normal house. Callum crouched down. He pressed on the section. Nothing. He pressed harder. Changed the angle. Pushed from the side rather than straight on. A soft click. Mechanical. The sound of a latch designed to be invisible that had succeeded for a long time. The wall moved, not dramatically, not like a movie, just a section of it about 30 inches wide and 6 feet tall, swinging inward on a concealed hinge with the quiet, unhurried movement of a door that had been very well made and very well maintained over many years. Dark inside, cold air, the smell of old wood and old paper, the smell of the tin box before he opened it, the smell of things that had been kept carefully. He found the light switch by feel. A single bare bulb came on overhead. A small room, 8 feet by 10. Low ceiling. 1 small vent near the floor for air. A narrow workbench against the far wall, the kind with built-in cubbies and drawers. A wooden chair pulled out slightly from the bench as if someone had just stood up from it. And on the workbench, on the wall above the workbench, on every surface in that small room, paper. Documents in neat stacks held with binder clips. Legal papers formal and stamped. A fat envelope sealed with tape and labeled in Silas's handwriting. Photographs pinned carefully to a corkboard on the wall. Callum stepped inside. He looked at the photographs first. His father, at every age. Baby photographs, the kind that would have been sent to family when a child was born, the formal awkward ones in little outfits. School photographs in neat chronological order, one for almost every year. A photograph of his father at what looked like college graduation, grinning in a robe and cap, shielding his eyes from the sun. A photograph of his father and his mother together, a candid shot taken from some distance, the two of them, on what looked like a city street, not posing. Just walking, his father's head turned toward his mother and laughing at something she'd said. His parents' wedding announcement cut from a newspaper. A photograph of his father holding a newborn, holding Callum. The photograph was small and slightly blurry, like it had been enlarged from something smaller. A candid from some angle Callum couldn't identify. But it was his father. Unmistakably his father, younger than Callum ever knew him, holding a wrapped-up infant with the expression of someone who had been handed something fragile and enormous and was determined not to drop it. Callum's hand went to the photograph without him deciding to do that. His fingertip touched the edge of it. Silas had found this photograph somewhere. Had gotten it somehow through Dot, probably through the kind of quiet, careful gathering that the letter suggested. Had printed it or cut it out and pinned it here in this room where no one but him would ever see it. His grandfather had a photograph of him as a newborn, pinned to a wall in a secret room, kept for 16 years. The world was very loud inside Callum's head and very quiet outside it. He sat down in the wooden chair. Copper, who had followed him up and into the room without announcement, came and pressed himself against Callum's legs. Callum put his hand on the dog's back. Breathed. On the workbench, the fat sealed envelope. His name on the front, same handwriting. He would come to that. Not yet. The legal documents first. They were in 2 stacks. He went through the first stack with the careful attention his father had taught him for important paperwork. Read every line. Don't skim. The thing you miss is always the thing that matters. The first stack was the supplementary will, fully executed, notarized, witnessed by 2 signatories he didn't recognize, dated 14 months ago, 4 months before Silas died. It confirmed everything in the main will. The house and its contents to Callum Ward, a modest trust fund enough for university and some years beyond. Nothing excessive, just enough. Carefully calibrated to give a person options without giving them an excuse not to build something real. And a letter from the notary attached at the back stating that a third party had been informed of this document's existence and location, and that it would be submitted to probate following the 30-day occupancy condition. A third party who already knew where this room was, who had a key to the house. Dot. Callum filed that away. The second stack. He went through it more slowly. Financial records, transaction histories. An account under the name Ward Family Trust, managed for the past 18 months by a Preston Ward, listed as temporary administrator following Silas's estate entering probate. The account had held a balance of $240,000 when Silas died. Current balance $61,000. 18 months, $179,000. Gone. Callum put the papers down on the bench. He pressed his palms flat against the wood. Not gone, not exactly gone. Moved, transferred, spent some of it, but mostly moved into accounts that were not labeled Ward Family Trust, into accounts that were when you followed the transaction trail that Silas had apparently spent his last careful months assembling and documenting, labeled with variations of Preston Ward's name and business interests. Preston, who had shown up on day 4 with polished shoes and a real estate contact and a friendly offer to help. Preston, who had said, "You're 16. You shouldn't have to deal with all of this." Preston, who had stood below the porch steps while Copper stood between them without being asked to. Callum thought about that. About Copper planting himself in the gap without a command. The way the dog's body had arranged itself as a simple physical fact. A border. This is where you stop. Good instincts, Silas had written. Better than mine. Callum gathered the second stack into order and set it back exactly as he'd found it. He went to Dot that evening. Walked. The cold had deepened since the afternoon, the kind of Vermont evening cold that had real intention behind it. Stars beginning to emerge in the east, brilliant and close the way they only were far from any city. Dot's house at the other end of the road was smaller than the Birch Road house and brighter from the outside windows, glowing warm gold against the dark. She answered the door before he knocked twice. "Come in," she said. I made tea. She had. 2 cups already on the kitchen table. Callum sat down, looked at the cups. You knew I was coming. I knew you'd find the room today, Dot said, sitting across from him. I could tell by the way you were looking at the house this morning when I drove past. Something had shifted in you. She wrapped her hands around her cup. Silas said you'd know when you were ready. Not that someone had to tell you, that you'd feel it. He was right. He usually was about the things that didn't involve people he loved. She said it without cruelty, just accurately. Much better at understanding strangers from a distance than family up close, which is I've found a fairly common failing in certain kinds of men. Callum looked at the steam rising from his cup. The photographs in the room, he said. He gathered them over years, some through me, some through other channels. He asked me not to ask where the others came from, and I respected that. He had a picture of me as a newborn. Dot was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. He did. How long has that been up there? She looked at her tea. 16 years. The kitchen was very quiet. He built that room in 1991, Dot said, the year your father left. He said he needed a place to keep things. I asked him what things. He said the things I can't have in the rest of the house because they're too much to look at every day, but that I can't get rid of because I'm not ready to have nothing. She paused. He wasn't good at much emotionally, Callum, but he was very good at keeping things, at not giving up on things even when he didn't know what to do with them. Callum thought about 23 unsent letters, about a photograph pinned to a wall for 16 years, about a man who cleaned his floors every week for 18 months after he was already dead, in a manner of speaking already gone still preparing. He knew about the money, Callum said. The trust, Preston. Dot's expression didn't change. Yes. He documented it. He spent his last months documenting it very carefully. He knew he wouldn't be here to address it himself, so he left you the tools to address it when you were old enough. She looked at him steadily. You're old enough now. I'm 16. Yes, Dot said. And you found a hidden room, and you read 23 unsent letters, and you sat with all of it without running. She looked at him the way she had the first day, like a photograph searching for the known person underneath. You're old enough. The tea had gone slightly cool. Callum drank it anyway. There's someone you should call, Dot said. A lawyer named Vera Hutchins. She's in Burlington. She handled Silas's estate and she knows everything about those documents. Your grandmother has her number. She tilted her head slightly. You should probably tell Nora what you found. I know. She'll want to help. She won't say it that way, but she will. Callum thought about the look on Nora's face when she said someone had to, the quiet certainty of it, the complete absence of drama. I know, he said again. He walked back to the Birch Road house in the full dark. Stars overhead now thick and brilliant. The birch trees lining the road stood white and bare in the darkness, reaching upward into the cold sky. Copper met him at the door, had apparently been waiting there. I wasn't gone that long, Callum said. Copper pressed against his legs briefly, then walked back inside. Callum followed. That night, after midnight. Callum was asleep in the downstairs bedroom, the one he'd moved into on day 3, when the covered sofa started to seem like avoidance. Copper was on the floor beside the bed. The house was in full darkness, the deep total dark of rural Vermont when the clouds cleared completely. Copper woke first. Callum woke because Copper woke. Not a sound that woke him, just the dog's movement. The shift of a heavy body from sleeping to alert in one instant, the way animals move between states without the gradual stages that people needed. Callum lay still and listened. Wind, the trees, the house settling. And then something else. A footstep. Careful. Too careful. The weight distributed wrong the way it was when someone was trying not to make the floor speak. Copper stood up. He didn't bark. He had never been a barking dog. Copper communicated through presence, through placement, through the quality of his attention. Right now his attention was absolute and directed at the door to the front hallway, and he had positioned himself between the bed and the door in the same geometry he'd used on the porch with Preston. Same placement, same intention. Callum sat up slowly. The sound again. Coming from the direction of the kitchen. Hard to pinpoint exactly. He reached for his phone. not to call anyone, for the flashlight. He stayed still for 30 more seconds. Copper didn't move, didn't look back at him, kept his eyes on the door. The sound stopped. Then the specific squeal of the kitchen window, the old single-pane window above the sink that Callum had noted on day one needed weather stripping. The sound of old wood being encouraged to move in a direction it hadn't intended to move. Callum got up. He went to the door and opened it slowly, went down the hallway to the kitchen. Copper behind him, silent and close. He turned the flashlight on in the kitchen doorway. Empty. But the window above the sink was not quite latched. A gap at the bottom edge. Small. The kind of gap you'd leave if you'd been trying to open a window quietly and hadn't quite finished before a sound or a light stopped you. Callum stood there. Copper moved past him and circled the kitchen. Stopped at the window. Sniffed the sill carefully. Sat down. Not alarmed now. Just noting. Just recording. Callum crossed to the dining table where everything was laid out. He'd stacked the financial records separately on the left side of the table. They were on the right now. He hadn't moved them. He stood completely still and looked at the table. He looked at where everything was and compared it to where everything had been when he fell asleep, and took the full inventory of what was present and what was absent. The documents were there. The field guide was there. The floor plan, the letter, the 23 unsent letters were gone. He'd left them on the table, the bundle in the leather strip rewrapped. He'd been planning to read them again more slowly, to go back through the early ones he'd read fast because he was too raw to be careful the first time. Gone. Callum put his hand flat on the spot where they'd been. The table was cold. He stood there in this dark kitchen with the flashlight and Copper beside him, and the gap in the window and the empty space where his father's letters had been, and he felt something move through him. Not panic, not even anger yet. Something colder than both. Those letters were the only copies. Written by hand. Not photographed, not copied, not stored anywhere but in that tin box under the apple tree. And whoever had come through that window had known exactly what to take. Not the legal documents. Not the deed. Not the financial records with the transaction trail that Silas had spent months building. The unsent letters to Daniel Ward. The ones that could be used to argue in a legal context that Daniel Ward had deliberately cut contact, and that therefore any obligation Silas might have felt toward Daniel's son was sentimental rather than formal. The ones that were not legal documents themselves, but that told a story about what Silas had intended and why he had made the choices he made. Preston Ward was not a stupid man. Callum leaned against the kitchen counter. Copper sat beside him and leaned against his leg. "Okay," Callum said quietly, to the dark kitchen, to the gap in the window, to Preston Ward and his Connecticut plates and his real estate contacts and his polished shoes collecting dust on the gravel road. "Okay, we're doing this." He photographed the window, the latch, the gap, timestamp on every photo. He went back to the hidden room and brought everything down. Every document, every photograph, every piece of paper with Silas's handwriting on it. He photographed all of it. Sent the photos to his own email, then to Nora's email, then to a second account he created right there at 2 a.m. standing in the kitchen of 14 Birch Road, because he had read enough about what happened to evidence to know you made copies before things disappeared. He found the fat sealed envelope with his name on it, the one he'd set aside. He photographed the outside and the inside and every page and sent those too. Then he called Nora, 2:47 in the morning. She picked up on the second ring, no groggy confusion in her voice, no complaint about the hour. "What happened?" she said. A statement, not a question. He told her. She was quiet for 2 seconds. "I'll call Vera Hutchins first thing in the morning. Don't touch the window. Don't clean anything." "I know." Another pause, then quieter. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." Silence. Bush. Nora. "Yes." The letters were the only thing that felt like... The words didn't come out right. They rarely did at almost 3 a.m. after someone had broken into a place you'd just started to think of as home. Not legal, just him writing to my father. Nora was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing on the other end, could hear her thinking. "The letters are in your memory now," she said finally. "They've been in your memory since you read them. No one can take that." He hadn't thought of it that way. He wasn't sure it helped completely, but he held on to it anyway. Morning came in cold and clear. Callum stood at the kitchen window with coffee and looked at the apple tree at the back of the yard. The disturbed dirt at its base had frozen overnight, the edges of the hole they dug preserved in frost like a record of what had happened there. Copper sat beside him and looked at it too. The mirror. That was what remained. The third symbol. He went upstairs. The mirror was where it had always been. End of the hallway. Oval-framed dark wood slightly foxed around the edges the way old mirrors went. He'd passed it 100 times without stopping. He stopped now. He looked at it, not at his reflection, at the mirror itself. The frame, the way it sat against the wall, the way it was attached. 2 brackets at the top, standard. But there was a third bracket at the bottom lower and toward the left that didn't match the other 2. Older hardware, a different shape entirely. He pressed on it. The mirror tilted, slightly, a quarter inch, enough to reveal that behind the lower left corner of the frame flush with the wall was a small recess. And in the recess, a small compartment dry and protected. And in the compartment waiting was a single envelope. Thick, business-sized. Silas's handwriting on the front. 2 words only. Both of you. Callum stood in the hallway with the envelope in his hand and Copper sitting at his feet looking up at him. Both of you. Not just Callum, 2 people. He thought about who this was meant for. He knew. He brought the envelope downstairs, set it on the table, did not open it. Not yet. He called Nora. I found the last thing he said when she answered, but it's addressed to both of us. I think you need to come here. A pause. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Nora said. Part 3, what we pass on. Nora arrived in 19 minutes, not 20, 19. Callum noted that without knowing exactly why it mattered. Just that it did, that she hadn't hesitated, that she'd put on her coat and her boots and gotten in the truck and driven the gravel road in the early morning cold without stopping to weigh anything. She knocked twice and came in. That was new. She'd always waited to be let in before. Not today. Copper met her at the door. Didn't jump, just stood close tail moving slow and steady and let her put her hand on his head the way she'd started doing somewhere around day 8 when nobody was making anything of it. Nora looked at the table, at the envelope, at Callum's face. Sit down, he said. I'll make coffee. She sat. He made coffee. The kitchen had the quiet of early mornings in houses that had held a lot of history. The furnace ticking, the trees outside still, the frost on the grass catching the first thin light. He put the cup in front of her, sat down across from her, the envelope between them, both of you, in Silas's handwriting, in the careful, deliberate penmanship of a man who had spent the last years of his life being very precise about things he should have been precise about decades earlier. Nora looked at it for a long moment. He never sent me anything either, she said, quietly. Not bitter, just factual in the way Vermont people were factual about weather. It had been. Here we are. How long were you married? 11 years. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. We separated when Daniel was 14. Not divorced, separated. Neither of us got around to the paperwork. I think we both believed at some point one of us would call. A pause. Neither of us called. Callum thought about 23 unsent letters, about a whole family of people who couldn't pick up the phone. Maybe it was just the Wards, some inherited stubbornness that moved through the bloodline like a recessive gene showing up in every generation in the same form. Too proud to speak first, too proud to be the one who needed something from another person. He sent me a card when Daniel died, Nora said. One card, store-bought, signed with just his name, Silas. She said the name the way you said the name of someone you'd loved for a long time and were still figuring out what to do with. Callum slid the envelope across the table. You open it, he said. She looked at him. You've been taking care of his house for 18 months, Callum said. You were here before I was. You open it. Nora looked at the envelope. Her hands when she picked it up were steady. The envelope held 3 things. A folded letter, long, several pages. A smaller envelope inside sealed labeled Callum in a slightly different handwriting, shakier clearly written later when the hand was less reliable. And a photograph, black and white, small and square. Nora unfolded the letter and began to read. Callum watched her face. She read the way she did everything, without performance, without letting the expression run ahead of the information. But there were places in the reading where something shifted, where her jaw set slightly, where she blinked once deliberate the way people blinked when they were keeping something behind their eyes and choosing to keep it there. It took a while. The letter was long. When she finished, she set it on the table and looked at the window. Outside, the morning had fully arrived. The frost was beginning to lift from the grass in the thin sunlight. Copper had gone to lie in the patch of light near the back door, his coat catching the gold of it, glowing like something warm from within. He says he was wrong, Nora said, not summarizing for Callum's benefit, just saying it aloud, putting it in the air of the room, making it real by speaking it. He says he spent 30 years being wrong and that he knew it for at least 20 of those years and didn't do anything about it because doing something about it would have required him to say so first. She was quiet for a moment. He says he's sorry for the silence, for not coming to Daniel's funeral. Another pause. For not calling. The kitchen held all of it. He says he loved me, she said, that he never stopped. She pressed her lips together briefly. He says that's not an excuse, that love without action is just weather, something that happens to other people but doesn't warm anyone. She looked down at the letter on the table. He actually wrote that, weather. Callum thought that's exactly right. That's exactly what it is, something that moves through you, that shapes you, but that you can't control and can't give to anyone unless you actually do something with it. He picked up the smaller envelope with his name. Nora nodded. Go ahead. He opened it. The handwriting inside was the most uneven he'd seen from Silas, written last clearly, much later than the other letters. The words were spaced differently. Some letters formed slowly with effort, but the sentences were clear. The meaning was unmistakable, like the man had used the last of his precision on making sure this one landed right. Callum, you found the room, which means you found the letters, which means you understand more about your father and about me than I was ever able to tell you in person. And I'm sorry it had to come this way. I'm sorry about a lot of things, but I'm trying not to make this letter a list of apologies because you deserve more than that. I want to tell you what I see when I look at what I know of you. I see a boy who lost his father and didn't fall apart, who got on a bus with a dog and went somewhere he'd never been to do something difficult because the alternative was doing nothing. That's not small. Most people your age, most people at any age would have sold the house site unseen and moved on. You didn't. I don't know if that's stubbornness or courage. In the wards, it's usually both at the same time, and there's no clean way to tell them apart. Your father named you after my father. I didn't know if he did that for me. I still don't. But I want you to know that your great-grandfather, Callum Ward, was the only person in my life who ever made me feel like being exactly what I was. Not better, not more was enough. He died when I was 22. I spent the rest of my life trying to find that feeling again in other people and being too proud to let them give it to me. Don't do that. Whatever you build, whatever comes next for you, let people in before you run out of time to let them in. That's all. That's the only thing that matters. The house is yours. The trust is yours. Do something real with both. Keep the dog close. He has better instincts than anyone in this family. Silas Callum read it twice. Then he folded it and held it in his hands, like something that had weight and temperature, like something completely real. The photograph was still on the table. He picked it up, black and white. A boy maybe 9 or 10 sitting on the grass beside the apple tree in the backyard of this house. The apple tree, decades younger, slimmer, the branches in full summer leaf. The boy was grinning, squinting against what must have been bright sun. And beside him, pressed against his side, a large pale dog. Golden retriever, ears long, coat light tail, a blur at the very edge of the frame. Goldie. And the boy was his father at 9 or 10 sitting under the apple tree in the yard of this house on a summer day that no longer existed with a dog, that no longer existed with a face that had not yet learned all the things faces learned over time. Before the falling out, before the silence, before any of it, just a boy and a dog in the sun. Callum turned the photograph over. Daniel, age 9, with Goldie, summer 1988. He looked at Copper in the patch of morning light. Copper's coat caught the gold of it. Ears too long, drooping slightly left. Tail a slow, steady wag. Eyes half closed in the warmth. His father had chosen a golden retriever, had named him Copper, that particular red gold a shade deeper than most goldens. had brought him home when Callum was 3 years old, and never once explained why, because you didn't explain the things that came from grief and memory and love, all tangled together into something you couldn't separate anymore. You just made the choice. You just brought the dog home and hoped that was enough. Callum put the photograph face up on the table. He didn't say anything. Neither did Nora. They sat in the kitchen of Silas Ward's house, their house now in different ways, and the morning came in around them, and Copper breathed in his patch of light, and the frost finished lifting from the grass outside. After a while, Nora picked up the photograph, looked at it for a long time. "He looks happy here," she said. "Yeah." She set it back down carefully, face up where they could both see it. "He was," she said. "For a while he was." The meeting with Preston happened 4 days later. Not at the Birch Road house. Vera Hutchins had been very clear about that. Neutral ground, she said. Her office in Burlington. Scheduled, documented, everyone sitting down like adults who understood the situation. Vera Hutchins was 53 and had handled Silas Ward's estate from the beginning. She was small and composed and wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke in the measured tones of someone who had spent decades in rooms where people were at their worst and had decided long ago not to be surprised by any of it. She'd spoken to Callum twice by phone before the meeting. Both times she'd been clear. You don't have to say anything in that room. You don't have to perform anything. You just have to be present. I'll handle the rest. Callum had said, "I'd like to say one thing." She'd said, "All right, one thing." Nora drove, 2 hours south. The mountains went past the windows in the gray November light, the last color gone from the trees, now the shapes of things revealed in the bare branches. Vermont in November was honest, the way Vermont in October was beautiful. Both had their uses depending on what you needed to see. Dot had offered to come. "Do you want me there?" she'd asked. Callum had thought about it genuinely. "No," he said, "but thank you." She'd nodded like she'd expected that answer and respected it completely. Copper rode in the back seat with his head on the center console. Vera's office was on the 3rd floor of a building in Burlington, and the lobby had a no-dogs policy which Callum had anticipated. He'd arranged for Copper to wait in the truck with the windows cracked and a water bowl and a treat. He'd been saving a large beef knucklebone that Copper had been eyeing in the kitchen for 2 days with barely contained patience. The dog took the bone with an air of extreme dignity, settled into the back seat, did not look up as Callum closed the door. "See you in an hour," Callum said. Copper chewed. Fair enough. Preston was already there when they arrived. He'd brought his own lawyer, a man in his 50s with a briefcase that looked expensive and an expression calibrated to project reasonable confidence while revealing nothing. Preston himself was in a dark blazer. He'd skipped the tie, a deliberate choice probably, less formal, harder to read as adversarial. He looked at Callum when they came in, and something moved across his face. Just briefly. Not guilt exactly. Something more complicated than that. The expression of a man who had told himself a story about who he was dealing with and was revising it in real time sitting there at the table. Because Callum was 16, and he was sitting down at a table in a lawyer's office in Burlington with his grandmother beside him and his grandfather's documentation in front of Vera Hutchins, and he was doing it without visible distress, without performance, without the trembling or the anger or the youth that Preston had probably been counting on. Just present, just quiet, just there. Vera opened the meeting with the efficiency of a woman who had better things to do and would not be using more time than necessary. "We're here," she said, "to address 2 matters relating to the estate of Silas Ward. The first is the validity of the supplementary will executed 14 months before Mr. Ward's death, which transfers the property at 14 Birch Road and associated trust assets to Callum Ward. The second is the management history of the Ward Family Trust during the 18-month period of provisional administration." Preston's lawyer started to speak. Vera looked at him over her glasses. He stopped. "I'll continue," she said pleasantly, "and then you'll have opportunity to respond." She laid out the first matter. Clean documented, notarized, witnessed airtight. The supplementary will was valid and had been valid since the day it was signed. The 30-day occupancy condition had been met. Callum Ward had occupied the property continuously for 31 days as of this morning. The property and the trust were his. Preston was looking at the table. Then the second matter. Vera opened a second folder, the transaction records, the account history, the $179,000 that had moved in 17 months from the Ward family trust into accounts associated with Preston Ward. She described it without drama, just numbers, just dates, just the trail that Silas had spent his last months assembling and that Callum had photographed and that Vera had verified independently through the estate's accounting records. She did not use the word theft. She did not need to. The numbers used it for her. Preston's lawyer leaned over and spoke quietly in his ear. Preston was still looking at the table. Vera set the folder down. "Mr. Ward," she said to Preston, "you have the opportunity to respond." Preston was quiet for a moment. Then he looked up. Not at Vera, at Callum. "You're 16, he said. Not as an argument anymore, not as a strategy, just as a statement of something he was genuinely trying to understand. "You found all of this?" Callum looked back at him. "Your father built that room," Callum said. "He put everything in it. I just went in." Preston looked at him for a long moment, and Callum watched something move through the man's face that he hadn't expected to see there. Not defeat exactly, not even shame, or not only shame. Something older, something that looked in a specific light like recognition, like a man who had spent a long time telling himself a story about the family he'd come from and was now sitting in a room with evidence that the story was different than he told it. His father had built a room, had spent 20 years keeping it carefully, had left a trail of careful documentation, not as a weapon, but as a record of love that couldn't speak, and grief that couldn't move, and a man trying in the only ways he knew how to stay connected to the people he'd failed. Preston had chosen a different response to the same inheritance, had taken what he could reach instead of waiting for what might be offered, had told himself probably that there was nothing to wait for, that the old man hadn't cared and had never cared. The documents on the table said otherwise. Preston looked away first. "What do you want?" he said. Quiet, not to Vera, to Callum. And this was the moment Vera had said, "You can say one thing." Callum had thought about it for 4 days. He'd been very careful about it, because you only got one shot at this, and he didn't want it to be the wrong thing. "Give it back," Callum said. "All of it, and stay away from the house." Not shouted, not with anger, just the sentence, clean and final. Preston looked at him. "That's it," he said. "That's it." Preston was quiet. His lawyer murmured something. Preston shook his head slightly. "Once." "All right," he said. He said it to Callum, not to Vera, not to his own lawyer, to Callum. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. Vera and Preston's lawyer handled the specifics of repayment and timeline and documentation. Nora sat beside Callum and once, only once, put her hand briefly on the table between them. Not touching him, just there. Callum put his hand beside hers, close but not touching, the Ward family way, the dialect of people who loved each other without the vocabulary to say it directly. Close was enough. Close had always been enough. The tragedy was that it had taken this long for anyone in the family to understand that close offered consistently was actually everything. The drive back was quiet. The mountains again. The bare trees. The sky going gray and low as the afternoon progressed, the Vermont sky of November that promised snow without yet being ready to deliver it. "He didn't fight it," Nora said at some point somewhere in the mountains. "No, I didn't expect that." Callum thought about Preston's face when he saw the transaction records, when he understood that Silas had spent his last months assembling them, when he understood that the old man he'd told himself didn't care had cared enough to spend his final year making sure things would be set right for a grandson he'd never met. That could do something to a person, even a person who'd done wrong, maybe especially that person. "He knew what the room meant," Callum said. Nora glanced at him. "He knew his father built it. He knew what was in it." Callum looked out the window at the mountains moving past. He knew the old man had been paying attention this whole time and had never said so out loud. A pause. That's harder to sit across from than an angry person. Nora was quiet for a while. "You sound like him sometimes," she said finally. "Silas, your father." She kept her eyes on the road. "The way you said that, the way you think about things sideways before you say them." She didn't look at him. "He did that. Exactly that." Callum didn't know what to do with that, so he held it. The way he was learning to hold things, not setting them down and not carrying them so tightly they cut into you, just held the way you carried something valuable over uneven ground. Day 30. The actual 30th day fell on a Wednesday in mid-November. Callum woke early, before the alarm, before full light. He lay in the downstairs bedroom of 14 Birch Road and listened to the house and the dog breathing and the distant sound of wind in the birch trees along the road. 30 days. He'd done it. Vera had confirmed this previous evening that everything was in order. The trust had been transferred. The repayment schedule for Preston's withdrawals had been signed and witnessed. The property deed was officially in Callum Ward's name. He was at 16 the legal owner of an old house in Millhaven, Vermont. He lay there and thought about what that meant and what it didn't mean. It didn't mean he knew what came next. It didn't mean high school was going to be easier or his mother was going to understand, or the 4 months of emptiness after his father died had been retroactively filled by anything that had happened here. It didn't mean any of the hard things were finished, but it meant something real. He got up, made coffee, stood at the kitchen window. The backyard was white. First snow, overnight quiet the way the first snows always came in Vermont. Not dramatic, not announced, just there when you woke up. Like it had always been there, and the bare ground had been the aberration. The apple tree stood in the white yard with its bare arms raised against the pale sky. The disturbed earth at its base was covered now, the evidence of the digging hidden under the first layer of winter. You'd never know anything had been there unless you'd been the one doing the digging, and then you'd always know. Copper appeared beside him, put his nose against the window glass, fogged it immediately, looked at the snow with an expression of absolute complete delight. "You've seen snow before," Callum said. Copper looked at him, looked at the door, looked back at him. "Okay, fine." He opened the back door. Copper went out into the snow at speed, not graceful. Golden retrievers were never graceful in fresh snow. They were joyful and ridiculous and completely committed, and Copper was no exception to this rule. He ran a wide circle around the yard, ears flying paws, throwing up white sprays. He stopped at the apple tree, sniffed the base where the tin box had been now covered under an inch of white, satisfied that everything was still there beneath it all, then ran another full circle. Then came back and sat in front of Callum in the open doorway. Snow on his ears, snow on his muzzle, tail making a wide arc through the snowpack behind him, destroying it thoroughly. The most ridiculous animal, the best animal. The animal his father had chosen because of a dog named Goldie, and a summer in 1988, and a love that couldn't be said directly but could be given 4 paws and long ears, and eyes the color of dark honey that never looked at you with anything but absolute uncomplicated devotion, no matter what. Callum sat down on the back step in the cold. Copper came and sat beside him. They looked at the yard together, the apple tree, the white ground, the birch trees at the property edge, white trunks disappearing into the gray-white sky. No clean distinction between earth and air this morning. Just white and the dark shapes of the trees moving gently through it. Callum reached into his jacket pocket. The pencil was there. He'd started carrying one 4 days ago, just in case. The way you started carrying things again when you thought you might need them, when the part of you that had gone quiet started to come back online, slowly, cautiously, not sure of its welcome. And the small notebook. Blank. He'd found it in one of the workbench drawers in the hidden room. Clean pages, waiting for something. He opened it. He looked at the apple tree. He started drawing. Not perfectly. Not the way he used to before everything changed. The lines were uncertain in places, the proportions slightly off his hand, remembering less than he'd hoped. But it remembered something. The decision at each moment about pressure. Light here, darker there, this branch reaching and that one resting. He drew the apple tree in the snow. He drew it from where he was sitting on the back step, looking up at the reach of the bare branches against the winter sky. He drew Copper beside it, sitting in the snow ears, drooping ridiculous and perfect. He pressed harder on the line of Copper's tail, getting it right. The way his father had pressed harder when a drawing was going right. That same small rush, that same private joy that belonged to no one else and needed no one else to understand or validate. His father at 9 drawing birds in the margins of a field guide in this same house. Callum at 16 drawing a dog in the snow in the yard of this same house. The same motion, the same pencil against paper, the same stubborn reaching towards something you couldn't say any other way. Not lost, not gone, just earlier. A version of this that had existed before and would exist after passing through the generations like a name, like a dog's coloring, like the particular way a person thought about things sideways before saying them. Dot came by at noon. She came to the front door, this time knocked 3 times, and when Callum opened it, she was holding a plate of corn muffins covered in a clean dish towel and wearing her rubber boots and her heavy knit cardigan and an expression that said, "I know what day it is, and I'm not going to make a production of it." "Day 30, she said. "Yeah. Thought you could use muffins." "I can always use muffins." She came in, set them on the counter, looked around the kitchen the way she always did when she came inside, taking inventory, making sure everything was as it should be. "Nora's coming for dinner," Callum said. "I told her I'd cook." Dot looked at him. "You cook?" "My dad taught me a few things." He paused. Apparently cooking was something he actually passed on directly. Dot's face did its subtle shifting, that near smile that lived just under the surface of her expression. "What's on the menu after roast chicken? I've made it twice this week practicing." "Practicing," she said, like she was deciding how to feel about the word. "It was acceptable both times," Callum said. "I think the third one will be genuinely good." Dot looked at him for a long moment. This boy she'd met 3 weeks ago on the porch of the house she'd been tending for 18 months, who had gone through her neighbor's hidden room and his father's unsent letters and a break-in and a meeting with lawyers and the first snow of winter all in 30 days, and who was now standing in the kitchen talking about roast chicken with the calm of someone who had found his footing somewhere solid. "Silas would have liked you," she said. "Not sentimental, just true." "Yeah, you're stubborn in the same direction he was. Just." She straightened up. "You know how to turn toward people instead of away." A pause. "That's the difference. That's the whole thing." She left shortly after, left the muffins, left the warmth of having been there, which lasted in a room longer than people ever realized when they were the ones providing it. Callum stood in the kitchen after she'd gone. Toward instead of away. That was the whole thing. He thought about Silas, who had turned away, who had spent 20 years in a room keeping photographs of a son who didn't know he was being watched, who had loved from the wrong distance and too late, and finally in the last year of his life had started turning toward. Slowly, through documents and floor plans and hidden rooms and brass keys and field guides, through a carefully cleaned house and a neighbor with a key and a letter with 3 pencil drawings at the bottom. He had started turning toward. It was enough. It had to be enough. It was all that was left to work with, and Callum was going to work with it. Nora arrived at 5:30. The roast chicken was in the oven. The kitchen smelled like butter and thyme and the warmth of cooking on a cold evening, which Callum was only beginning to understand was one of the best smells in the world. And that understanding it was itself a kind of growing up. She stood in the doorway and looked at the kitchen and then at him. "It smells good in here," she said. "Sit down. It'll be ready in 20 minutes." She sat. He poured her coffee the same as every morning. She wrapped her hands around it the same way, the same gesture he'd watched her make at her kitchen table, and now watched her make at this one. Copper came and sat beside her, and she scratched his ears without looking down, the way she'd been doing for 2 weeks now. Like it was always something she'd done. They didn't talk about the lawyers. They didn't talk about Preston or the trust or the 30 days or what came next in any formal sense. There would be time for all of that. There were things still to figure out, school the house through the winter, what his mother would say when they finally had that conversation. Decisions that 16-year-olds shouldn't have to make alone. But Nora was here, and Dot was down the road. And Vera had said, "Call me for anything, large or small. That's what I'm here for." And the house was standing, solid, holding them the way it had been holding things for 50 years, built by a man who loved badly and kept everything anyway, who cleaned his floors every week after his family was gone, who arranged for the heat to stay on for a grandson he would never get to meet. The chicken came out golden. Callum set it on the table. Nora looked at it. "Your father used to make this," she said. "I know, he taught me." She looked up. "I found one of his handwritten recipe cards," Callum said, "in the kitchen drawer here. He must have left it behind when he left this house." He sat down. "I used his measurements." Nora was very still. "His exact measurements," Callum said. "He was very specific about the time. He always was." The kitchen held the moment the way the house held everything else. Carefully, without making a production of it. Nora looked down at her plate, then back up. Her eyes were bright in a way they usually weren't. She didn't blink it back this time. She just let it be there. "Then it'll be good," she said. "I think so." They ate. Copper lay under the table and waited for anything to fall with the patient optimism that was his defining characteristic and would be until the end. Outside the kitchen window, the snow had started again, light and steady. The birch trees along the road going white on one side, lit by the warm glow from inside the house. The windows fogged at the edges. Nothing dramatic about any of it. Nothing resolved in the neat final way of stories that wrap themselves up completely. There were still hard things ahead. There would always be hard things ahead. That was not something a house or an inheritance or 30 days in Vermont could change. But something had shifted. Something real and permanent. All the silence that had built up in this family over decades in this house between these people, it hadn't disappeared. Silence like that didn't disappear. But it had made room. It had become something you could sit inside without being flattened by it. The Ward family silence, which had once been a wall, had become something more like weather. And weather you could dress for. Weather you could walk out into and come back from. That was enough. That was more than enough. After dinner, after Nora left with her coat buttoned against the cold and a wrapped piece of chicken that Callum had pressed on her and she'd accepted without any pretense of not wanting it, Callum washed the dishes, dried them, put them back where Silas had kept them in the cabinets where they'd always been. Then he sat on the back step one more time. The snow had stopped. The yard was quiet and white. The apple tree stood in it with its bare arms. The stars were coming through the clouds in the east one by one, brilliant and patient. Copper came out and sat beside him. Did not run this time. Just sat, pressed warm and solid against Callum's side. That golden retriever warmth that radiated steadily like something had been left on inside. Callum had the notebook in his lap. He looked at the drawing he'd done that morning, the apple tree in the snow. Copper with his ridiculous ears and his tail making a blurred line in the white. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was his hand on the page, his eye finding the shape of things, his particular way of pressing harder when a line started going right. He turned to a new page. He was going to draw this. The yard and the stars coming out, and the snow on the fence posts, and Copper beside him, breath visible in the cold air, ears drooping left the way they always did. He put pencil to paper. His father had sat in this house at age 9 or 10 and pressed a pencil harder on a page when a drawing of a bird was going right. That same small rush in the chest that meant, yes, this keep going. The same motion, across time, across all the silence and distance and years of people not calling. The same reaching towards something true. Not the same life, not the same losses, not the same anything really, but something moving through all of it. Something that had a name and didn't need one. Something that passed between people who loved each other badly and well, and from the wrong distances, and too late, and sometimes just right. Just close enough. Copper's tail thumped once against the step. Slow, steady, I'm here. Callum drew. The stars came out one by one over Millhaven, Vermont, over the birch trees and the old house and the apple tree, where a tin box full of unsent love had waited in the cold ground. The house behind him stood in the dark and the cold and held everything it had ever held, every drawing and every letter, and every year of silence, and every week of a neighbor's quiet faithfulness, and every photograph pinned to a wall where no one would see it. It had held all of it. And now it held this too. A boy learning to draw again, a dog breathing beside him, the stars coming out. Home.